What's poppin', mi gente? It's your boy back with another video. First up, Merry Christmas to everybody. Feliz Navidad, Prospero Año y Felicidad a mi gente latino. I hope everybody enjoyed their holiday. I put up a Patreon post on December 25th. I wanted to put up a video, but unfortunately the holiday's been pretty hectic, and on Christmas Day itself I wasn't done setting up the video and didn't want to do a half job on it. I had my entire family waiting on me too, and when Abuelita's waiting, you don't want to keep Abuelita waiting, or you get la chancleta when you walk in the door. For those who don't know Spanish, Abuelita's grandma. But anyway, so here we are. I had a little more time today to finish up the video and finish it up right. Before anything else though, I want to give a special shout out to Tommy L and Nadine C for their generous PayPal donations this month. I also made sure to thank you too in the post I put up yesterday. This video is going to mostly discuss just setting up the hitboxes, and it's going to use Richter as a brief example. I'll probably discuss hitboxes again when I do the whip, but I do go into a little bit of detail comparing Richter to Alucards, because a big thing with hitboxing is setting it up in a way that the player can play the game without feeling like there's ever a point where they feel like, oh man, I shouldn't have, how did that hit me? That didn't hit me. Oh man, that should have never happened. Those of you who have played Dark Souls know exactly what I'm talking about. Old school arcade games where you get tagged by something and go, how did I take damage? That never hit me. Or even the old Nintendo Castlevania games, which I'll mention briefly later on in the video. So, let's go ahead and jump into this video. I feel like that's enough of an intro, and I'm just excited to get started. I'm working on old school Richter, legacy Richter as I like to call him. Okay, so two small changes I made between the previous video and this one is, one, I changed this view over here to instead be by frames. Previously it was on seconds, now it's on frames, which is much easier for me to follow through on. I actually wasn't aware this feature was here. I'm not sure when it was put in, but it's a very useful feature. The other thing I did was I named this player graphics instead of player sprite, and added two more objects here. And there's a reason for that, which I'm about to discuss right now. So first off, before we really get into this video, I do want to make one change to my setup. If you saw my previous video, you'll notice I had set everything up so that we had the main player object here, old Richter, followed by a child object that was going to hold the graphics. However, let me show you all an issue I'm already running into. I've added a box collider 2D here, and this is an issue I ran into with Alucard that I made sure to learn from my mistake here. Notice how this box is moving up and down. That is because this box collider 2D is directly attached to the graphics itself, the sprite. So guess what? Every time this sprite bounces up and down, this box collider 2D is going to move with it, which really makes setting up box colliders much harder, because as you can see here, this box collider is perfect as is. If I could just get it to not pop down one, it works for all of the frames. No need to go in and edit it. The default value works just fine. Maybe here near the end, if I want to get real nitpicky, I can edit it slightly, but I mean, it really shouldn't be necessary. If I get this box collider to stay right where it is by default, it should be fine. I shouldn't need any edits, and this will save you on development time. Now, at this point, creating a child object of this parent one already won't work, because the sprite is here and the animator is here. So even if I created a child with just a hitbox like this, well, take a look, same result. Because this is a child, notice how it pops down. This just won't work as is. So the correct way to do this will be to actually take this and make this just a container for the animator, and then create the sprite and hitbox separately here. This way, whenever the sprite moves, the hitbox won't move. And I'm actually going to pause the video and make that change so that you guys don't have to sit here and just watch that, because it's mundane and boring. So I'll be back in just a few. Okay, so now that I made the little tweaks I wanted to make, we can go ahead and continue. As you can see here, the animator is now in this object labeled animator, which is under the topmost object, which is the name of the object we're messing with, old Richter. So now it's animator, and you can see you have the sprite here. It has a sprite renderer and a hitbox here, both totally separate. And you'll notice now when I play the idle animation, the hitbox isn't moving anymore because the sprite and the hitbox are separate. They both have the same parent object, this animator, so that the animator can edit both of them. But you'll notice for idle, I didn't have to change anything. For walking, I didn't have to change anything. Hitbox is perfect as is. Saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of effort, and is consistent, so that you can pretty quickly recognize if you have a ton of stuff coming at you. Hey, here's where I can get nailed. Here's if I'm in a tight space between two slamming pillars with fireballs coming at me, I pretty much have a general idea of what the hitbox is and how much wiggle room I have. which lets you have a lot more things coming at you, a much faster gameplay overall. Now, let's go ahead and look at dashing. Same thing, no real need to change anything here. You know, we don't really want him to be wider, the legs really don't want them to be hit. We leave it in the middle, which I'm going to go and pause this briefly, and I know this looks kind of funny in slow motion, but think about it. When you're playing the game, if anything is right in the middle here, you should take damage. If you're running over a thornweed, you don't want to take damage when your front foot would hit it. We could set up extra hitboxes to put it here, but we don't want to do that because it's going to give you less reaction time. We want you to have a little more reaction time, so if there's something on the ground here, when it hits here, you may not have caught it yet, but by the time it gets to about here, it doesn't sound like much of a difference, but it makes a lot of difference, and it really does make the gameplay seem a lot less frustrating. So I like to keep the hitboxes simple. I like to make them smaller so I can have a lot more stuff coming at you at once, and you never feel like, oh my god, I just got hit by something that should have totally missed me. This is ridiculous. So as you can see, I didn't have to change the hitbox on any of those there. However, I am going to have to change it on this animation, the stopping one, and here's why. You can see already it's not staying aligned and he shrinks some. Okay, now this frame is fine as is, no real need to change it. But starting about here, he gets really short. So let's edit it a little bit. Let's go ahead and, I'm actually going to do it right here. I'm going to go to first record, and I'm going to go to edit collider. I'm going to hold control while I do this so it does it by 0.1 pixels. 2, 3, 4, and that looks good. And now I want to go ahead and move it some. So let's see if holding control will let me. Nope, being a difficult pain in the ass there. Okay, so I could change the X or Y positions, but to be consistent, it's easier to just edit the collider like this. And I can see I have a size of 0.7 going, which is 7 pixels, so I pretty much want to end with 0.7 pixels there. You want to be consistent with your hitboxes, or fairly close to consistent. Sometimes you'll have slightly larger ones, like this one right now looks like it's going to be 9 pixels, and that's not really a big deal. You know, now I've got to find a comfortable medium here because right here it's encompassing a lot of the back but not much of the front, so what I can do instead is just do this, and if I wanted to extend it a little more to make it wider, let's see, hold on, how does it look relative to the original? Yeah, I think that'll look pretty good because if a projectile hits you here, you're not really going to notice something hitting you there. It won't look funny. This is a background leg, so I mean whatever's hitting him should really be hitting the chest, possibly the foreground leg, so it'll go in front of the background leg up until it hits about here, then there'll be collision, which looks pretty good. But if I wanted to tweak it a bit more, and this is again judgment call here, you know, it's all about how you want it to be. I could move it around however I like, but you see how simple this is. It's not affecting anything else. Also, make sure you're hitting record when you do this, because if you don't, well, whatever edits you make are going to go bye-bye. Another thing I want to do here is I'm going to highlight everything, and I want them to be constant, these changes. I don't want them to be linear. I don't want it to change slightly between each frame because I'm manually setting them myself. This one should be set to the default, but let's make sure, yep, the default values are there, so we're good. And now here's what I'm going to do, because I don't like this right here, and I don't want to have to create a ton of hitboxes. Oops. So let's just do this. Let's make life really easy and move this back one frame. And now the hitbox, okay, here, jumps back to here. Nope, that's not going to work after all. I wanted to do that because, well, I just wanted to give you a little more wiggle room, but it looks too funny. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a comfortable median here. Right now we have 0.8, 3.6 for the sizes. Position doesn't really matter too much unless you really, like let's say you have the hitbox here and I had to jerk it way back here. Now you have a space in between that if something was in that space, it would miss you completely in between the frames as you move it. I don't know if I explained that very well. Hopefully I did. But the bottom line is you want to make sure when you move your hitbox around that you don't suddenly jerk it back enough that if something's in that space, like let's say there was somehow an object that was coming down vertically here in this space, and I jerked the hitbox all the way back here, well, guess what? Since the hitbox is here, then jumps back here, whatever was here isn't going to collide with the player, obviously, because the hitbox never touches it. And that's why you don't want to do that. It's not likely to happen, but again, it's just proper coding, you know, making sure to be consistent so you don't have anything funny go on, because you never know what size projectile or what size object you could later on design that could be particularly small. And then you have issues with things looking like they go completely through your sprite between various frames. It's just a headache overall, so trust me, don't do it. Be consistent. Okay, so 0.8 and 3.6. Let's go ahead and edit this one. We're going to edit you down probably about that much. And I think moving this back, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, okay, so maybe we'll end at 0.8 for this one too. Yeah, I think that will work pretty good. We have 0.7 and 0.4, 0.8 and 3.8, 0.8 and 3.6. Yeah, and you can see they get smaller and smaller here. If I want to go down a little more, I could, but let's see how the rest of the frames look. I think they're pretty consistent, so yes, I think I will go down maybe 1, 2 more pixels. Yeah, I think that'll work just fine. So we have a gradual change. As you can see, there's no real gaps here. You know, there's no point where this hitbox moves around where nothing that's anywhere at any point touching him that should register a collision won't, because we don't have it jerking around. And that's what you want. Again, gradual movement. You don't want it to jerk anyway. You want to make sure the space is just about all covered. Yeah, and I think this is good. This one right here, I may want to edit this a little more. You know what? I think I will. I think I'll move it forward 1 each side. Yeah, I think I like that a little better. But again, judgment call. I can tweak this once we get off the recording here. I just wanted to show you guys how to do a hitbox. You guys are getting the idea here. You want to make sure you cover enough of it that, you know, it's when something hits you, and this is for enemies, keep in mind, when he picks up items, that it registers, but you don't want that hitbox to be so damn big that it just feels ridiculous, and it feels like, damn, you know, I'm getting hit by stuff that shouldn't hit me, like in the old Nintendo games where an object would just tip the corner of your sprite and you'd register a hit, and it was just like, oh, this is so annoying. It's like, why is this happening? Okay, so now let's start putting it back here. We should end at 0.7 and 4, I believe. Not sure if I'm going to cover all that. No, we're not going to end vertically just yet, but let's take a look. Yeah, 0.7 and 4. Just shift it up a little bit here. And again, these frames, you don't have to worry about each individual frame so much, as it's not a big deal. You're not going to, like, the chance of you getting hit on that frame are so low, nobody'd ever notice it anyway. So, but we have 0.7 and 3.9 here. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty centered and pretty good. I can move it down 1 more if I want to be a little anal here. Again, really don't want his hair to register damage, mostly just his head. So we have 0.7 and... Nope, I forgot to hit record. The same thing I told you guys to watch out for. Hit record, otherwise your changes, they go bye-bye as soon as you start recording or come out of preview. They won't be there. Okay, so now let's take a look. 0.7, 3.8, and this should be the last one. So this, I literally just have to copy the initial values. Okay. Once again, let's hit record. Let's just go ahead and do this because this is going to be pretty fast anyway. And go up to so 5, and I am going to zero these out just because I don't know why Unity does these rounding errors like this. They're really, really aggravating, but I like to just round things off, be consistent. You can see his hitbox is back where it started. We're done. We don't have to really do anything else there. You know, he's set up to go back to idle. This is the idle sprite you can see here. This is the shift back to idle. This is idle. You can see it's fine. No problem. So now let's go ahead and make sure that, again, everything is at constant. It should be. Yep, we're good. And now as he stops, you can see how that hitbox shifts back. I'm going to slow it down a little bit so you guys can see. Nope, sorry. I meant to slow it down some. My bad. You can see as I slow it down some, everything is always covered. There's no point where something can slip in here and somehow go through him because we have gaps in our hitboxing. But you can also see that hitbox barely grows at all in this setup. So if you have stuff coming at you and you're trying to stop on a dime, well, you're pretty good. You're going to be able to dash and stop between those spike pillars coming down on you. If your fireballs raining from above on each side, you'll be able to stop between them and you'll be alright. You don't have to worry about, oh my god, my hitbox suddenly jumped to a massive size and I took a hit there and oh god, it's so aggravating. You can have faster gameplay like this. So, let's go ahead and look at one that I already set up for crouch. Now crouching, I want to point out first, you'll notice it's an extremely fast animation. If I play it, it's literally a step per frame. And the reason is, if you're crouching, you're usually trying to duck under something, and it's usually coming at you pretty fast. So the last thing you want to do is duck down and get tagged by something because the animation is too slow. So it needs to be quick. And with the hitbox, you can even see I start lowering it here in this first frame because we'll go to Alucard in a moment, but you'll see Alucard immediately shrinks in size as soon as he starts ducking. Animation-wise, Richter has one step where he doesn't shrink just yet because he shifts his arm back. But that doesn't matter gameplay-wise. Gameplay-wise, you still need to shrink your hitbox because if you don't, guess what? You're still full size here, and if there's a projectile directly in front of you, you tap down and your hitbox is still this size, you're going to take that hit. And that's really frustrating. And this is something you might have noticed in Rondo of Blood. Sometimes when you go to duck, it seems like you duck and still get tagged. And I believe this is why the hitbox might be shrunk one step, one frame too late. So we just shrink it here. It doesn't hurt anything. If a projectile goes through him here, nobody's ever going to see it because this animation is this fast. And you can see it matches the next frame, so this way it's already starting up. And now he's fully shrunk here. And again, notice, fully shrunk at that point, his head's still popping up, but no big deal. Again, if there's something passing through here at this point, well, I'll give you a freebie, it misses you. So again, you can have faster gameplay. Now, this particular size, I picked it because I didn't want to make this hitbox too short. If I make it down to here, then there's things that are going to pass through his head, it looks like, and it just looks kind of funny. So again, judgment call here. I chose to make it this way. I'll test it during gameplay, and if I'm not happy with it, I can always shrink it down some. But the reason I did this size is I was trying to be relatively consistent with Alucard. Unfortunately, his sprite, the size is a little different, and it's really unavoidable. Here you can see you have 1.1 and 2.5 for the measurement. So 11 pixel width, 25 pixel height. Okay? Now let's look at Alucard's. Let's go to his crouching animation. Again, notice at the very start, immediate change and immediate shift so that he doesn't get tagged, and that's important. And now you'll notice the rest of these frames, it's the same size. It doesn't change at this point. Here, you can see the size is 1.2 basically and 2.2. So 12 pixels and 22 versus 11 and 25. So he's slightly skinnier than Richter's is. No, he's slightly wider than Richter's, excuse me, by 1 pixel. And slightly shorter because he crouches down a little more. Not really a big deal, but I was trying to be relatively consistent because as you're going through a game, if it's going to be faster paced, you want people to, again, know what their hitbox is. Those few pixels can make all the difference. Now, this isn't something like a bullet hell game. A bullet hell game like Dodon Patch or Death Smiles or Mushihime-sama or any of those types of games. You'll notice that all the ships have the same size hitbox. It's usually only a couple pixels in size, and every ship, it's consistent no matter how big the ship is, because it would just be too much for the player to have to figure out the different hitbox sizes for each ship. That's generally the case. There are some exceptions. I've seen some bullet hells where the boxes are a little different. I think Kitsui is one of those. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100%. But bottom line is, when you're going to have really fast gameplay with a lot of shit coming at you, you want to have smaller, consistent hitboxes. Now, this isn't a bullet hell. You're not going to have hundreds of things coming at you at once, so we don't need to be that consistent. But that was my thought process. That is the reason why I'm harping on this so much. It's not to waste time, but it's because there's a lot of thought that goes into hitboxing if you want your game to be faster paced. If it's going to be slower paced, then it's not that serious, because you have plenty of time to evade at that point. And even then, you don't want to have like hitboxes that encompass the whole sprite in a square like in the Nintendo games did. Let me show you an example of what you probably would have seen in a Nintendo game. Again, preview, so I'm not recording it. It'll be temporary. But this is more like what you probably would have seen in a Nintendo game. A hitbox like this. And you see that? You see how much empty space is encompassed here? Anything touches you, you're taking a hit. And that's aggravating. Think of all those times you played Nintendo Castlevanias and a Medusa had... You looked like you were barely going to make it over. You did the jump right, and it just happened to tip you, and you took damage and knocked you in a hole. Aggravating as hell. Not something I want you guys to have to deal with. So, that's hitboxing in general. Quick summarization. I might have mentioned this earlier in the video. I'm also using a box collider because it uses less processing power than a polygon collider. We don't need a polygon collider here. There is literally no point for a polygonal collider or a circular collider. A square collider works just fine. You don't need your collisions to be that exact. Even in a 3D game, you usually can use rectangular objects over the different limbs and just have those move with the limbs and you're good to go. Also, some of you might have noticed in Alucard's case that my hitbox is on the sprite, and this is how I learned with the animator, and this is how I learned not to do that. This was a big mistake. This took a lot of time to do his hitboxing because, as you can see, values had to change almost every frame. It took a long time, just wasn't fun, so keep that in mind when you're doing your hitboxing. You want to have the animator on one object and then have children for a sprite and a hitbox, and it makes life much easier. A perfect example of hitboxing is right here for Alucard. Notice his hitbox, his size. Now you'll notice this is a weird animation where his feet shift back and forth, and it seems like his hitbox is covering empty space here. And I could have easily set up a second hitbox, have this one ended here, have this one on the feet. But again, he's moving backwards. This gives you a little more reaction time. Plus, this animation is so fast, you're never going to notice if he gets hit when his legs aren't there. Look how quick that is. You have a split second where his legs aren't in that space where the hitbox is, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't hurt anything. You kind of have to find a comfortable medium between making your hitboxes accurate and gameplay based on your motion. You want your player to have a little bit of wiggle room, so it's like, okay, I'm about to run into something, I jump up, okay, I missed it just barely, phew, skin of my teeth. And it looks just fine, it doesn't look out of the ordinary. Anyway, I hope that I didn't drag on too much about hitboxing, but it's just extremely important, and there are just a lot of factors to take into consideration when you're setting them up. But with that being said, I feel like this video has gone on long enough at this point. So leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this development video. If you haven't subscribed to my Patreon yet, definitely join up. You know, the more contributions I get, the sooner things get done on the project, the more help I can afford to pay for, and just the quicker I can overall get something out to you, and you have something in your hands to play. If you can't do a monthly thing, you can always do a PayPal donation. Links will be at the bottom of the video for all of this stuff. As well as usual, if you want to join the forums or the Facebook page, the links will be down below in the vid. Again, happy holidays to everybody. Let me know what you all thought of this, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.